Hello, Sagar. Hi,
Yes,
Himanshu.
Dr. Pathania, welcome to this session. You will be introduced by Ritika Di.
Hi, Ritika.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I am Ritvika Roy Chaudhary, a postgraduate student at the Department of English, Presidency University, Kolkata. A very warm welcome to all participants, presenters, and the chair to the parallel session 13 of the two-day international conference, Theorizing Anti-Casteism. The current session will be chaired by Gaurav J. Pathania. Gaurav J. Pathania is an assistant professor of sociology and peace building at the Center for Justice and Peace Building in Eastern Mennonite University at Harrisonburg in Virginia. He has previously taught at Georgetown University and George Washington University in Washington, D.C. Gaurav also served as a visiting scholar to the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, and at the University of Southern California. His ethnographic research in cultural sociology addresses issues of caste, class, and racial discrimination among diaspora and focuses on contemporary identity movements among university students in the US. Gaurav has recently authored his first book, The University as the Site of Resistance: Identity and Student Politics, Oxford University Press, 2019. He is part of the editorial board of South Asia Research Journal of the School of Oriental and African Studies, London. Gaurav is an anti-caste writer, poet, and activist, and currently working on his memoir. Gaurav won the National Poetry Award for 2016, organized by the Poetry Society of India. His anti-caste poetry appears in J Caste Journal, published by the Brandeis University. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Ritika, for such a kind introduction. Um, and I would like to thank the organizers and especially to Dr. Mohitash Mandal for inviting me to chair this session. It's an honor to be part of the Presidency University, which has been serving as a strong voice of resistance in the country. Um, so I would just directly move to let me introduce one by one as we have. I'm given um, the sequence of our papers. So the first paper we have today, so it will be so we're starting now at six o'clock. We'll end by 7:45. Um, the, um, the time of each paper would be like 20 to 25, and so we kind of honor the time limits, and feel free to share your PowerPoint or if you want to read. So let me start with the first paper, which is very interesting paper. I had a pleasure reading this paper. um, so this is the first paper by Dr. Himanshu. No, Mr. Himanshu, which is let me first introduce Himanshu. Himanshu is enrolled as a junior research fellow in the Department of English, University of Delhi. Um, his primary focus is Girimitya literature. Uh, it is his research. His research investigates the writings of Girimitya diaspora for the themes of migration, exile, nostalgia, identity, caste, and gender. He's interested in the history of human civilization, which helps him look at the work of literature coming from the margins with an anthropological approach and provides the necessary interdisciplinary dimension to his research. He has a profound interest in post colonial studies, folklore studies, migration, and diaspora studies, food studies, and anti-caste literature. So he operates in many of these areas of research. So the title of his paper is "Reducing the Value of a Man to His Immediate Identity." Reading Yashica that's coming out as Dalit against the backdrop of casteism in the universities. So we have, so this is the first paper. We have a total of 4 papers. So I think we'll go one by one, and we'll have, so keep your questions ready for the end. So we'll first finish all the papers. So on that note, I invite Himanshu. Himanshu, over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pathania, for the introduction, and a very good evening to all of you. I am Himanshu, and the title of my paper, as sir said, is "Reducing the Value of a Man to His Immediate Identity." Reading Yashica that's coming out as Dalit against the backdrop of Casteism in university. India as a civilization boasts thousands of years of history and deems itself culturally superior to many newer but far more developed cultures and nations. The majority in the country, Hindus, worship more than 33 million gods. Hindu gods have been assigned portfolios like cabinet ministers. Every goddess is in charge of their own department. For example, Lakshmi for wealth and prosperity, Indra for rain and storm, Agni for fire, and so on. Similarly, Hindus also have a goddess for knowledge, wisdom, and learning, that is Saraswati. The very portrayal of Saraswati in Hindu mythology is symbolism for education, wisdom, and truth. It is her duty to bless her worshippers with knowledge and wisdom that comes through education. However, the data collected by the government and its agencies show that the benevolent mother Saraswati had failed of her innocent children. A considerable percentage of the Indian population, especially Hindus, still lacks proper access to education. In 1947, when the British left, India had a literacy rate of mere 12%. Even after more than 7 decades of independence, the female literacy rate in Indian rural areas has only reached up to the mark of 50%. The Constitution of India grants equal rights to all citizens, irrespective of their caste, religion, or gender. Inequality prevails in every aspect of Indian society nonetheless. The unequal education system of India has been largely successful in keeping quality education in accessible to its Dalit Bahujan population. The spirit of Manu still walks in educational institutions, from local schools to the country's premier universities. Dalit Bahujan children start witnessing institutionalized caste-based discrimination from the day they enter an educational space. News of children dying after eating poisoned midday meals in government schools, to students committing suicide in premier institutes like IITs is a testimony to that. Excuse me. Reading, sorry, Yashica Dutt's memoir coming out as Dalit is a conflation of our lived experiences, ground stories of rampant casteism in Indian societies and anti-caste movements in India. The text is replete with information as it delves into details every now and then with sheer journalistic brilliance. She maps her journey from a town, Rajasthan, to the prestigious St. Stephen's College at Delhi University. Along with it, she provides the readers with details of how networks of caste and class, privilege, and elitism function in these educational spaces. We have been used to reading horrific details of anti-caste atrocities in Dalit autobiographies, but what Dutt's memoir does differently is that it brings forth a new narrative in the existing discourse of Dalit literature and intellectual tradition. It does not tell us a story of a Dalit living in the rural setup where the caste system still exists with utmost nakedness and in full glory. Coming out as Dalit is a story of a seemingly middle class English-speaking urban Dalit who had to go to extremes to hide her identity in order to fit in properly with the definition of Brahmanical aesthetics. While the text mostly met with positive and welcoming reviews and well justified criticism if there were any, the online trolls acting as caste certificate checkers tried to dismiss Dutt's narrative with an argument that she had not faced enough discrimination as a Dalit owing to her English education and lower middle class status. Hence, her book is not worthy of any serious attention or importance. This argument is casteist in itself. Nevertheless, Dutt's narrative laid bare the subtle and sophisticated ways of casteism in urban, educated, and seemingly progressive spaces. She recalls casteism, and I quote, the individual arm that turns the gears in nearly every system in our country, unquote. The argument often used against reservation is that the undeserving are reaping its benefits. The ignorant upper caste population always comes up with the immature theory of reservation based on economic status rather than caste background. The done to death example of a rich Dalit availing reservation and going to IT still haunts the sanity and temperament of many rational minded citizens. India's pop culture is a reflection of its intolerance toward the idea of a Dalit living a dignified life. In this scenario, Dutt's memoir becomes even more significant as it informs the readers of the struggles of a type of Dalit who has been a constant target of the guardians of merit in India. Dutt recalls, and I quote, we are post-caste, we are told. Casteism is over. We are chided for addressing the inequality our Dalitness saddles us with and are sharply reminded of the unfairness of reservation, unquote. It tells us that despite all the progress made in the last 7 decades of India's home rule, a family from a historically disenfranchised community has to struggle harder to get the same things as the families from historically privileged communities. Their fight for even the bare minimum is greater than that of the upper caste. A level playing field does not exist in any sense of the term. When we hear one of those hackneyed and superficial stories about a poor but honest and educated Brahmin living in a village, surviving on the bare minimum, what we tend to miss is that despite being poor, that Brahmin was able to get educated, and while he was surviving on the bare minimum, he did not have to move even he did not have to move a muscle even for that. He did not have to toil day and night for his survival. The same cannot be imagined for the Dalits. That notes, under quotes, Peggy McIntosh describes an individual package of unearned assets. This individual package, which is attached to their not so individual upper caste, opens doors for jobs, bank loans, business opportunities, and education that are often closed for the Dalits. Even when a Brahmin has no money, he or she almost has education. A poor Baniya nearly always knows how to run a business and has the financial acumen to multiply wealth and economically challenged Kshatriya will likely to have management skills and political know-how, unquote. Hindrances in the mass education of Dalit Bahujans. The idea that the ruling upper caste elite of India tried to float is that Indian educational space were these casteless places where nothing but merit flourished and directed the nation towards the path of progress until the reservation was introduced. They claimed that it was reservation that invited casteism inside the gates of educational spaces as it made everyone start to think along the caste lines, something that was hitherto unknown to them. The leading intellectuals from the premier institutes of this country gave the argument that reservation kills merit. It would render the talented upper caste youth of the country jobless. It is a telling comment on how good of a role goddess Sati had played in bestowing its most beloved upper caste children with intellect and common sense. To simplify, what the upper caste intellectuals meant to say is that making education accessible to the majority of this country was wrong and perhaps detrimental to the nation's progress in the long run. Such logic would blow away the mind of any intellectual around the globe. However, it is different in India because these are not simply complaints of a community worried about losing jobs or opportunities to the hitherto marginalized or someone less worthy. This is the anxiety and frustration of a community that had successfully managed to keep the majority on the margins until now. This is not even a recent phenomenon. The ancient religious writings and rituals of India have molded and conditioned the Indian psyche. Sacred scriptures forbid the lower caste from receiving any education at all. There have been constant attempts to hinder the mass education program by leading and revered Indian upper caste educationists throughout history. Mahatma Gandhi writes, and I quote, "The ordinary meaning of education is knowledge of letters. To teach boys reading, writing, and arithmetic is called primary education. A peasant earns his bread honestly. He has ordinary knowledge of the world. He knows fairly well how he should behave toward his parents, his wife, his children, and his fellow villagers. He understands and absorbs the rules of morality, but he cannot write his own name. What do you propose to do by giving him knowledge of letters? Will you add an inch to his happiness? It is not necessary to make this education compulsory. Our ancient school system is enough. We consider your modern school to be useless." Unquote. While writing about the subtle yet violent role that surnames play in a progressive spaces, Nitish Sobna observes, quote, "The example of Swadesha Bhimani Ramakrishna Pillai, a Brahmanical nationalist and Malayalam translator of Karl Marx's biography, is quite telling. When Travancore princely estate passed an order for the Dalit school entry in the early 20th century as a result of the persistent anti-caste mobilization by Ayan and others, Ramakrishna Pillai wrote an editorial which not only opposed such a move but also humiliated Dalits by stating that children of those who have cultivated land for centuries cannot be seated along with the children of those who have cultivated their brains for centuries. Bengal went through a renaissance since Bengal went through a renaissance in the British Raj and is considered one of India's most progressive societies. There have been several social reformers in Bengal who are revered for their contributions to date. A.K. Biswas, in his article on the universalization of education in India, quotes from a letter written by one of the luminaries of Bengal Renaissance, Ishwar Chand Vidyasagar, to John Peter Grant, the Lieutenant Governor of Bengal, opposing the Charles Woods Dispatch of 1854, which proposed mass education on September 29, 1859. Vidyasagar writes, and I quote, "An impression appears to have gained ground both here and in England that enough has been done for the education of the higher classes, and that attention should now be directed towards the education of the masses. An inquiry into the matter will, however, show a very different state of things. As the best, if not the only practicable means of promoting education in Bengal, the government should, in my humble opinion, confine itself to the education of the higher classes on a comprehensive scale." Unquote. These writings reveal that the contempt against the education of the lower classes is not something new. In fact, it has been inherited from the very greats themselves. Several social scientists and policymakers historically examined the concept of a university and its ties to democracy, nation building, and knowledge production. Such debates have frequently evaded a comprehensive historical examination of the social institutions and activities that founded, developed, and sustained universities. In other words, the universities concept is frequently not contextualized in the unique histories of its site and participants. As Shobna observes, quote, "The politics of the historically oppressed to enter various ranks of the university should always be studied along with the politics of the historically powerful to sustain their influence, not concede to opponents or make compromises of varying degrees." Unquote. Had it not been for the continuous struggles for anti-caste leaders and intellectuals, Indian universities would not have opened their gates for the Dalit Bahujans at all. According to Pierre Bourdieu, this gatekeeping stems from the desire to regulate the mechanisms of reproduction of cultural capital, casteism in university spaces. It is the anxiety of the upper caste order that manifests itself in the form of institutionalized casteism and discrimination toward the students of Dalit Bahujan backgrounds. There are many ways in which a Dalit Bahujan student is made to feel ashamed of their identity, background, and culture. The upper caste people who hold power often misuse it to harass Dalit Bahujan students, from casually taunting or shaming for availing reservation to deliberately giving lesser marks in exams and interviews or delaying the scholarships. There is no end to the limit to which the upper caste order has gone in order to make life difficult for Dalit Bahujan students. In her APW essay, Dishad Vati Bargi argues that Dalit students are identifies as an illegitimate presence in the casteist culture hostile to the reservation system. It is believed that the upper caste order that the mere presence of Dalit Bahujans pollutes the holy garden of Saraswati, that is the universities. A Dalit Bahujan student often has to hide the apparent markers of his caste identity in order to survive in upper caste dominated spaces. For example, private schools, universities, and so forth. That writes about hiding one's identity.
Himanshu, I'm just stopping you. So you have only 2 to 3 minutes left.
I'm sorry, sir. I would need just 5 minutes, please.
Okay. Yeah, wrap it up, please. Yeah.
So, yes, and I quote:
Come to the
"We
conclusion.
create upper caste." Okay, sir. I would have to leave a lot of it. Okay. Conclusion. Yashica, that's coming out as a Dalit is a significant addition to the anti-caste intellectual tradition. It puts its argument brilliantly and bravely and can prove to be a valuable tool to tackle everyday casteism, at least in debates in urban and seemingly progressive spaces, if not everywhere. Its beauty lies in its journalistic brilliance. It has the potential to easily become the handbook for dealing with immature arguments against reservation that had gone to extraordinary lengths in her documentation of a history of anti-caste movements and in making the text a solid argument as well as an undeniable piece of evidence against the caste system. As a memoir, its beauty lies in its honesty and truthfulness that admits to concealing her identity and passing off as an upper caste to blend in the upper caste dominated spaces and succeed in life. She also accepts that there had been times when she had felt guilty for being a less deserving quota student. However, its appealing factor is that it resonates with the youth of Dalit Bahujan communities going through the same ordeal. Rohith's suicide was a turning point in her life, as it was for many other Dalit Bahujan students. This made her recognize that her history is one of operation and not shame. Her memoir is a productive outcome of that recognition, and now it will continue to motivate the coming generations of Dalit Bahujan students. Thank you.
Thank you, Himanshu. Thank you for the reading the paper. Very nice. Just quickly, most of the narratives you presented and the language you used it reminds me of our public intellectual Professor Kanchailaya Shepherd. So, but I didn't see any citation of him in your paper. So think about it. In the meantime, let's hear our next paper, which is by Mr. Soudh Ishmail. Yeah. So the timing of the so you're taking 20 minutes, not more than that. So Himanshu took extra time, but let's stick to 20 minutes because then we'll have a discussion, right? So try to focus more on the points that you're making, just a key point rather than fully reading the paper. So, okay, so this is a very interesting paper now, the second one called Framing Caste Through Repertoires of Contention, anti-caste student mobilization and collective performances in an Indian university. So let me introduce Soudh Ishmail. So Soudh Ishmail is a PhD fellow at the Department of Political Science, University of Hyderabad. His research interest includes theories of contentious politics and social movements in South Asia, with special focus on protests politics of educated youth in India. His PhD projects look into the nature and dynamics of student movements in post 1990 India through a comparative case study of students' contentious engagement and mobilizations happened in three public universities around the issues of caste discrimination, privatization, and saffronization of higher education. So, Ismail's paper, I truly enjoyed reading your paper, Ismail. So, looking forward to hearing from you. Over to you, Saud. So, 20 minutes. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers, the chair, Professor Gaurav J. Pathania, and all the presenters who are presenting this session. The title of the paper is Framing Caste Through Repertoires of Contention, Anti-Caste Student Mobilizations and Collective Performances in an Indian University. Contentious mobilizations happened around the implementation of Mandal Commission recommendations has had a persistent impact on Indian social and political terrain, whether in the forms of politics of affirmative action or as middle-class youth agitations against caste-based reservation. The political turmoil caused by MCR had defined not only the immediate time in which it was implemented, but also the dynamics of Indian politics in subsequent decades. It was a major step in the process of democratizing Indian society and politics. There is a tremendous shift in the nature of lower caste mobilization since Mandal reform, what has been termed as a silent revolution by scholars like Christoph Jefferlord, which has categorically transformed the power dynamics of national politics in contemporary India. With the anti-Mandal agitations of upper caste students in 1990s, a vertical split had occurred within the political body of India, where caste-based identity became the point of contention and ideological anchor around which the discourses began to conduct. In the case of higher education, MCR or Mandal Commission recommendation has brought indubitable changes in the structural and cultural spheres of public universities and induced students in shaping a critical discourse based on caste identity and social justice in campus spaces. Caste-based identity assertions have become a recurring phenomenon in university politics since the implementation of Mandal Commission recommendation in 1990. There are fundamentally two reasons for the emergence of this phenomenon in public universities. First, political divisions and contentious campaigns came up during the MCR turmoil. The Mandal Commission, the turmoil which is caused by Mandal Commission recommendation, has created a rupture among students wherein caste-based reservation and politics of merit and open competition has become a crucial issue for public discussions and debate in universities. Second, considerable number of other backward class students, OBC students, began accessing universities since the implementation of Mandal reservation, which has resulted in the formation of new caste-based student collectives and political organizations in campus. Apparently, these freshly formed organizations has mobilized for the rights of OBCs, Dalits, tribal and minority students in campuses and demanded for the effective implementation of reservation policies in public universities. University students have organized multifarious campaigns and protest events against the issue of institutionalized caste discrimination in higher education since 1990s. Public universities like Jawaharlal Nehru University, University of Hyderabad, Osmania University, English and Foreign Language University, which has been popularly known as IFLU, has seen various rigorous anti-caste protest struggles and caste-based identity assertions demanding for the rights of marginalized students in universities. These identity-based student collectives equally criticize the prevalent left and right-wing organizations in universities and aspired for an autonomous caste-based politics in campuses, inspired by the ideas of anti-caste thinkers like Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, Jyotiba Phule, Savitribai Phule, and Periyar E.V. Ramaswamy Naicker. Although the anti-Mandal agitation lasted only for months, the MCR turmoil has created a fertile ground for the propagation of caste-based student politics in these universities. Among the mentioned universities, University of Hyderabad, or HCU as it popularly called, has marked a critical space in anti-caste student movements with its ferocious campaigns and protest mobilizations against issues pertinent to reservation and caste discrimination in higher education. HCU has seen consistent Dalit, OBC, and tribal student mobilization since 1990s with organizations like Ambedkar Student Association, Dalit Students Union, Bahujan Students Front, and Tribal Students Forum taking critical role in setting the anti-caste political discourse in campus. During 2016, a spectacular campaign has emerged in HCU against the institutional murder of Dalit student Rohith Chakravarti Vemula, which ignited to a larger student movement against caste discrimination in India. Between this anti-mandal agitation of 1990s and justice for Rohith protest of late 2010s, various caste-based mobilizations and protest events happened in the campus that has marked for its contentious performances and mobilization strategies. Fresh anti-caste repertoires and frames were adopted by students in these protest campaigns that has helped in sustaining caste-based student mobilizations in campus. The next section of the paper will look at the theoretical framework of the particular study. Theorizing caste movements and contentious politics, exploring the concepts of repertoires and frames. Caste-based student mobilizations and protest campaigns have been an eventful phenomenon in Indian politics since colonial period. The term caste movement can be identified as a blanket phrase to denote multiple mobilizations, campaigns, and identity assertions occurred against caste discrimination and claiming for the politics of social justice and community representation in India. These protest campaigns are wide-ranging that spans from demands for political representation to struggles for accessing drinking water from public wells. The nature and dynamics of caste-based mobilization are multifarious in terms of the issues it has taken, the strategies protest participants have adopted, the agendas and goals set for the mobilization, and finally in terms of the nature of participants involved in the mobilization. Hence, a convenient way to categorize these wide-ranging campaigns and mobilization is through separating caste movements on line with the kind of participants involved in this. Hence, caste movement can be further divided into individual mobilizations organized by OBCs, Dalits, Pasmanda Muslims, etc. Although these movements are divergent in terms of its varying demands and strategies, the larger discourse of these campaigns are set around the issue of caste discrimination and political representation in India. In spite of the prevalence of a vibrant scholarship on caste movements in India, there have been less number of studies happened on caste-based student mobilizations and identity assertion. Particularly, the nature and dynamics of these anti-caste mobilizations have not been explored by scholars in detail, and there is a lack of scholarship focusing on the ideological and performative aspects of these mobilizations. There is a tremendous scope in analyzing the nature and dynamics of caste movement within the framework of contentious politics. Contentious politics has evolved as a theoretical framework in 1990s to analyze and comprehend the mechanism and process of divergent collective actions ranging from small-scale protest events to transnational revolutions. By strategically employing a repertoire of contention, protest participants engage in contentious politics when patterns of political opportunities and constraints change. When their actions are based on dense social networks and effective connective structures and draw on legitimate action-oriented cultural frames, these protest events are transformed into social movement which sustain in society over a period. By mounting familiar forms of contention, movements become focal points that transform external opportunities into resources. Repertoires of contention, social networks, and cultural frames lower the cost of bringing people into collective action, induce confidence that they are not alone, and give broader meaning to their claims. Together, these four set of factors trigger the dynamic process that have made social movement historically central actors in political and social change. Among these four crucial factors, the paper has used the concept of repertoires and frames in analyzing the ideological and performative aspects of contemporary anti-caste student mobilizations. Repertoires can be understood as learned and historically grounded collective performances which vary according to space, time, and social structure. When people make collective claims, they innovate within limits set by the repertoires already established for their place, time, and pair. These repertoires draw on a long history of previous struggles. Framing, which is another concept which has taken for the study, relates to the generalization of a grievance and defines the us and them in a movement structure of conflict and alliances. By drawing on inherited collective identities and shaping new ones, protesters delimit the boundaries of their prospective constituencies and define their enemies by their real or imagined attributes through the process of framing. Mandal reforms and the emergence of caste-based student assertions in India, examining the case of Hyderabad Central University. There is a tremendous change in the structure and composition of public universities since 1990s with the emerged centrality of Mandal, Mandir, and market in Indian politics. Among these three contentious issues, the impact of Mandal reforms on Indian universities was severe, direct, and powerful. With the implementation of Mandal report, the OBC reservation in central government jobs was enacted in an immediate effect. However, the promise of 27% reservation for OBCs in higher education was fulfilled only in the later 2000s. Since 2008, there is a surge in the enrollment of OBC students in public universities with the implementation of 27% reservation. Although from 1990s there is a political discourse set around the issue of caste discrimination in public universities, the political action of anti-caste student activists were inconsistent and ephemeral for various reasons. It was largely organized by first-generation Dalit and tribal students with their limited socio-cultural capital. But with the enactment of OBC reservation in public universities, backward class students came into the picture with effective numbers. Considerable number of OBC students got admitted to public universities not only through the reservation list but also through the so-called open merit list. With the arrival of OBC students in campus spaces, the anti-caste discourse in universities received an intellectual and electoral push, and the anti-caste frame for student mobilization have broadened with terms like Bahujans. Among the admitted BC students or the OBC students, they were both Hindus and Muslims. While Hindu backward class students formed autonomous organizations and backed both left and right student groups, the Muslim backward class students brought up organizations like Muslim Students Federation, Student Islamic Organizations, and Fraternity, which talks outrightly against minority discrimination and the practice of Islamophobia in campus spaces. Unlike the other politically vibrant universities, organized student politics and activism began in HCU at a very late stage. Formation of student political organization and recurrent participation of students in political discussions and protest events began in 1990s. Mandal reforms and the subsequent political turmoil became a breakthrough in the domain of student activism in HCU. Interestingly, through Dalit students' assertions and solidarities, HCU became a hub of anti-caste student activism in India and ignited a new discourse based on caste and minority identities in the domain of student politics. This new identity-based discourse challenged the political standpoint of left and progressive student organizations and brought in the principles of caste annihilation and social justice in Indian universities. The bet for the politics of autonomous identity assertions was laid with the formation of Progressive Students Forum during the Mandal turmoil in 1990. There were a considerable number of Dalit and BC students in Progressive Students Forum. Subsequently, due to internal criticism and ideological differences, autonomous task-based organizations like ASA and DSU were formed within PSF. These newly formed Dalit organizations conducted socio-cultural events, public campaigns, and lecture series against caste discrimination in higher education. ASA and DSU, beyond their ideological differences and debates, categorically engaged with right-wing student collectives and university administration and stood up for the demands of marginalized students in campus. Later on, with the implementation of Mandal reforms in higher education, BC students started taking admissions in HCU, and consequently various backward class Muslim organizations began forming in campus. Caste organizations like BSF, OBCA, OBCF, and Muslim organizations like MSF, SIO, Fraternity became the torchbearers of new identity politics in campus and led various mobilization against the issue of caste discrimination and the attempts of privatization and suffraganization in universities since then. They also critique Student Federation of India, which is a dominant left-wing student organizations in campus, and other left student collectives like All India Student Association for their political views on caste, communalism, and identity politics. During the Justice for Rohith protest, the campus for the first time witnessed a spectacular campaign against Dalit suicide and the inherent caste biases in Indian universities. All the progressive organizations in campus, taking aside immediate differences, joined for the protest under the collective banner called Joint Action Committee, or JAC. Students demanded for the removal of Professor Afbarao Podel, who was the Vice Chancellor, and organized campaigns against Dalit suicide and institutionalized caste practices sustaining in Hyderabad Central University. So this section of the paper will look in detail the three anti-caste protest events and collective performances which happened in HCU. Framing caste through repertoires of contention, understanding anti-caste protest events and collective performances in HCU. Ideological and performative expressions of anti-caste student mobilizations have been distinctively critical yet an unexplored domain in social movement research. Public universities like JNU, HCU, and Osmania have seen various conspicuous protest events against the issue of caste, which are distinctive for its articulations and collective performances. This section of the paper will look into the ideological and performative aspects of three such protest events happened in HCU. Through taking the concepts of repertoires and frames, the paper will analyze the nature and dynamics of student articulations and collective performances in these protest campaigns. The three protest events analyzed below have played a detrimental role in sustaining anti-caste student politics in HCU. Also, the repertoires in these three campaigns have solidified and diffused into other public universities like JNU and various other universities during the late 2010s. The earlier forms of it can be identified in the protest events of 1990s. The repertoires adopted in these three campaigns have a direct and a powerful relation with the local Dalit movements and its performative expressions. The first anti-caste protest events taken for the study is the public burning of Manusmriti. The act of public burning of Manusmriti holds a strong historical root, which lay in the anti-caste politics of Ambedkar, Phule, and Periyar during the colonial period. It was during the Mahat Satyagraha the repertoire was initially adopted and collectively practiced. Under the leadership of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, a public event was organized in December 25, 1927, as part of Mahat Satyagraha to publicly read and burn Manusmriti, a Hindu text which religiously sanctions and codifies the laws for humiliating Dalits and sustaining caste practices in society. It was a radical protest act during the colonial period. Later on, anti-caste activists organized events to collectively burn Manusmriti on the day of Manusmriti Dahan Divas. Hence, Manusmriti Dahan evolved as a popular symbolic repertoire among Dalits and anti-caste activists in post-independent India. Although Dalit student organizations like ASA and DSU celebrate Ambedkar Jayanti, Mahat Satyagraha and other historical events very actively in campus, public burning of Manusmriti was limited into the fold of a symbolic repertoire which was practiced rarely in campus. Manusmriti Dahan was revamped into a symbolic protest repertoire by the activist of Bahujan Students Front in the later 2000s. Interestingly, in the late 2000s, there was a surge in anti-caste student politics in HCU with the arrival of OBC students, thanks to the implementation of MCR in higher education. Considering this shift, existing organizations like ASA, DSU, and BSF refurbished their political strategies and actively engaged with the new OBC students and contested among each other to become the most radical anti-caste organizations in campus. Consequently, the frequency of using Manusmriti Dahan as a protest repertoire went up during 2010s. Various OBC, Dalit, and minority student collectives adopted this symbolic repertoire to stage protest against various policy documents and reports. Through adopting the repertoire of Manusmriti Dahan, Dalit and anti-caste student activists have collectively framed a critical discourse against inherent caste nature of Hindu society and its multifarious practices in modern secular universities. The second protest event is the conducting of Beef and Asura festivals. Beef and Asura festivals were organized by students as part of a countercultural movement against Brahmanism and its dominant social practice in campuses. Hyderabad has seen immense number of Beef and Asura festivals organized by anti-caste activists and intellectuals during 2010. Osmania University was considered as a hub of dissent politics during that time with its radical campaigns and protest events. Dalit students in HCU who normally eat beef in their hometowns asserted for the right to publicly consume beef inside campus under the banner of Dalit Students Union. As part of this campaign, DSU organized a cultural program to publicly consume beef and opened up a food court to sell beef cuisines during the Sukoon, an annual cultural fest of HCU in 2006. This has led to public debates and skirmishes among students in campus. Inspired by these events, other Dalit organizations like Ambedkar Student Association and Bahujan Students Front adapted this particular repertoire in their protest campaigns, and eventually Beef Festival became a symbolic protest repertoire against the cow politics of Brahmanism and Hindu nationalism in HCU. Over the period, repertoire was normalized through publicly serving beef in anti-caste cultural events of campus. There is a surge in the number of beef festivals in campus since 2014 due to BJP government's ban on cow slaughter in various states of India. Left and Muslim student organization adopted this repertoire during this period and voiced against the politics of Hindu nationalism in India. There also had occurred various public discussions and campaigns against the celebration of Hindu festivals like Holi, Durga Puja, and Onam in campus due to its inherent caste bias and discriminatory practices. Through conducting Beef and Asura festivals in campus, anti-caste leaders have framed a caste-based critical discourse against Hindu celebratory practices and exposed both left and right organizations for its uncritical adaptation of these practices in campus. The third and the last protest event taken for the study is the construction of Velivada. The idea and practice of Velivada, which has been termed as a Dalit ghetto, is derived from the Telugu socio-cultural context wherein Dalits or the untouchables are forced to settle on the outskirts of villages because of their ritual impurity and lower caste status. The Velivada was constructed as a symbolic site in HCU to replicate the discriminatory practice in the context of expulsion of 5 Dalit students from university hostels in 2015, which led to the institutional murder of scholar Rohith Chakravarti. The 5 expelled students who were the activists of Ambedkar Student Association constructed a protest site near to the shopping complex area in university, which is a public place in the university, and campaigned for days and nights against the unjust punishment order of HCU administration. During the course of contention, one of the Dalit students, Rohith Chakravarti, committed suicide on 17th January 2016, which ignited in a larger protest movement against caste discrimination that has gained national and international attention. The Velivada was constructed out of banners which contained the pictures and quotes of anti-caste leaders like Ambedkar, Savitribai Phule, Periyar, and Ayyankali. During Justice for Rohith Vimala protest, students, faculties, and non-teaching staffs organized public events and cultural programs near Velivada. Hence, Velivada symbolized for the exclusion of Dalits in the mainstream spaces, spanning from the hamlets of Telangana to the modern public universities. Velivada also stands for the idea of purity and pollution, centering on caste, which propels the impure, untouchable Dalits to confine into the insignificant peripheries of Indian society. Construction of Velivada can be seen as a radical repertoire adopted by anti-caste students in HCU, which symbolize the discourse of Dalit marginalization and exclusion in modern public universities. So, coming into the conclusory part of this section, caste-based identity assertions have become a recurring phenomenon in university politics since the implementation of MCR in 1990. Among the public university, HCU has marked a critical space in anti-caste student movements with ferocious campaigns and mobilizations emerging against the issue related to reservation and caste discrimination in higher education. HCU has witnessed consistent Dalit, OBC, tribal and minority student mobilization since 1990s with organizations like ASA, DSU, BSF, TSF, SIU and MSF taking critical role in setting the anti-caste identity-based political discourse in campus. Consequently, HCU has seen multiple conspicuous protest events and public campaigns against the issue of caste, which are distinctive for its articulations and collective performances. In these caste-based protest campaigns, movement participants have adopted fresh anti-caste repertoires and identity-based collective frames, which are inspired and conditioned by local historical events and mobilization. Through collective performances like public burning of Manusmriti, organizing Beef and Asuda festival, and the construction of Vilivada, the protesting students have internalized and constructed an ideational universe of mobilization around the concept of caste, wherein their subjective experience of discriminations are aligned with the master frame of caste identity, which helped in sustaining anti-caste identity-based mobilizations inside the campus. Thank you.
Thank you, Saul. It was a wonderful presentation, and within time, I'm really happy, much appreciated. I like the term movement repertoire, and you touched upon this least studied area, which is Muslim student activism. Very, I haven't seen much literature on it, and so I'm glad that you highlighted that aspect. So let's talk more about it in Q&A. And let's move on to the next paper, which is by Dr. Pankaj Kumar. And Dr. Kumar is an interdisciplinary researcher and an academician. While his core discipline is political science, his training has evolved to include the subject of law and governance, in which he completed his MPhil and PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University. His PhD topic was Securing Environmental Justice, a comparative study of the National Green Tribunal in India with the Land and Environment Court in Australia, which he successfully defended in March 22. He has published research articles in many peer-reviewed journals and has presented in international and national conferences. He has previously worked as a researcher and faculty at University of Delhi. He is currently working as a research associate on access to justice protest of Ministry of Law and Justice, Government of India. His core research interest includes environmental governance, environmental courts and tribunals, exclusion and discrimination, and social justice. Very interesting profile in terms of working in, especially this area itself is also least studied in this context. So the paper actually you're presenting is Caste on Campus, Reimagining the Academic Space, Narratives from JNU and BHU. So thank you, Pankaj. Over to you. So 20 minutes. Huh?
Sir, you are muted.
Pankaj, you unmute yourself. Okay, he's presenting. That's good. Pankaj, are you sharing some PowerPoint?
Thank you, Professor Pathania, for a warm introduction, and the earlier speaker for setting the tempo. I'll be presenting through a PPT. I hope I'm audible and
Yes.
my PPT is visible to everyone.
Yes, we can see that. Yes, it's visible, Pankaj. Go ahead.
Okay. I hope it's visible on everyone's screen. So, okay. As introduced by sir, my topic is caste in campus. It's an update from the GNU and the BHU. So I would like to firstly give a brief overview of the presentation that I'm supposed. I'll be introducing the topic, and then I'll build on the exclusion aspect of how it has come into the academic debate, and then I would move on to the practice of caste in campus, and then would be I would highlight some common observation that has emerged from the GNU and BHU, and then I'll give out certain major findings that has been quoted in my study. Then we can all have a discussion after that. So, when the idea of social exclusion entered into academic debate as a theoretical concept around the end of 20th century, it was meant to reflect the situation of those people who did not experience themselves as fully participating member of society, but instead as a part of merely dispensable human mass. Since the use of the term law exclus by Lenoir in 1974, the word since the 80s has become a part of academic discourse, particularly in economics, political science, sociology, as well as psychology. So we have plethora of work done on exclusion in terms of literature, which provides the conceptual insights on social exclusion, the psychosocial aspect of exclusion, and power dynamics of exclusion to specific studies, which measures exclusion and discrimination. In while A number of authors have studied the the discrimination and exclusion aspect of institutions. There is very little literature available on the comparative aspect of what constitutes exclusion and discrimination in institutes of higher learning. So moving on to the the for centuries the hierarchically structured Indian society denied access of knowledge to the lower caste, thereby safeguarding the privilege of obtaining education to certain upper caste. This social exclusion was reinforced through custom and law, and the dismantling of such an edifice of strong social enforcement was not an easy task. The colonial rule inadvertently created spaces for the marginalized communities to access educational opportunities. In continuation of the emancipatory tradition, the Constitution of India created an egalitarian roadmap for the country, which emphasized the value of liberty, equality, fraternity, and justice. Dr. Ambedkar consistently had argued for a uniform national education policy to ensure quality education for all. It was only during the colonial period that the modern educational system was established in India. The lack of hitherto educational opportunities for the large masses of Shudras crippled their individual thinking, thereby creating a scope for subjugation. Thus, education is a vital instrument for social mobility to realize multiple freedoms, as opined by Amartya Sen, that education is one of the chief means to multiply one's prospect in life and to access what Bourdieu would call cultural and social capital. Cultural capital refers to those non-material resources which may be passed from generation to generation in order to preserve power and privilege. In a caste-based society which prevails in India, socio-cultural capital attains significance when one considers that students are slotted into categories of good and bad based on both a normative and normalizing judgment of the institution or through the value judgment of the upper caste teacher or students. Both, however, are dependent on the social and cultural capital that is sourced largely from the social location of the individual, thereby affecting her or his performance and ability to interact with the peer group and institution in general. It is for this reason Bourdieu and Althusser both unanimously agreed that scholars and higher learning institutes produce and reproduce power structure in the societies, both within the institutional framework which can be internally done through exams, merit, and credentials, as well as its interactions with the class structures externally, which is more of a intrapersonal interactions. Identities, vernacular medium of education, and urban-rural location, which provides a major determinants in social reproduction of cultural and social capital when it is majorly dominated by the first beneficiary of the caste system, that is the upper caste. Now, uh, uh, a university is supposed to be a democratic space which molds students into politically vibrant citizens. The Indian state, despite many hiccups in implementing the mechanism of affirmative actions, provided an entry point for many youngsters belonging to underprivileged communities to enter the hallowed portals of institutions of higher learning. Despite such positive measures, when the young students attempt to access educational opportunities and enabling environment is denied to them, our universities have become sites of social exclusion where Dalit students are denied a share in the cultural and social capital of society and are expected to bear this denial silently. Caste determines the field of education in India. Students who belong to the lower structure of caste experience discrimination based on caste in their day to day academic as well as non academic life. Some of the indicators of caste in educational institutes include language, vocabulary, accent and expression, communication skills, social skills, mannerism, names and surnames, your place of residence, dress and looks, body language, etc. While exclusion from a certain social groupings can lead to the deprivation of uh, mental block, humiliation, identity crisis, as it's visible from the screen. uh, Moving on to the main reason for doing this comparative study is to see as to the exclusion and discrimination experienced by the students belonging from the SC category in various universities in India. Uh, at 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 its basic, these exclusion and discrimination can be direct or indirect, intended or unintended, consciously or subconsciously done. Also, it seeks to study those which are practiced institutionally, structurally, or aided by socially superior communities, student, teacher, administrations. As part of study, 60 students were interviewed in both these universities. Purposive sampling method was used to choose students, and the questionnaire was both, it had objective as well as subjective in order to have a broader opinion based on the medium of education, in the medium of exclusion and discrimination. So, while moving on to the narratives that has emerged from JNUHU, so the sites of discrimination is very common to both these universities. So we have multiple, sites where caste as a entity has moved, not it has moved from the society to academic space as well. So in BHU we see more of an institutionalized discrimination in terms of gender discrimination, where it's in an example can be given to highlight that it's VC itself. The earlier VC was of the opinion that girls who visit library late at night are immoral. Moreover, you know uh, a non-vegetarian food should not be served in girls' mess. Moreover, in JNU, the classroom is an unequal space, primarily because the people who are the SC communities, who are the first generation learners, find it that difficult to go follow the readings and follow the class lectures. So the not by not providing remedial classes to them, they are already handicapped in their pursuit of attaining knowledge. Moreover, the ideological discrimination has come to be a part of JNU, where we see that people from marginalized and who have they follow the ideology of Birsa Ambedkar Phule are often discriminated upon based on their opinions and the way they articulate their experiences. So these are some of the common observation that has emerged is that caste has caste as like in society plays a very crucial role in the university space, uh, though not at the level that exists in society. There is no blatant form of untouchability, caste slur, insult, or direct feudalistic behavior that is is used as a tool to cause pain and anguish to the to the marginalized section is not directly used in the university space. Caste and ideological groupings are prevalent in the university spaces like inside and outside the classroom, hostel, canteen, mess. Rather than being inclusive, the university has become the hub of exclusivity, living its traditional form of segregation under the garb of neoliberal framework of ideas, persona, interest. And these becomes the new way to practice the old art of excluding SC students. What comes across as interesting is that there is not much of a feudalistic uh, tendency to discriminate like it happens at societal level. So we see that it has the university as a space has come to be represented by almost all sections of society. It's this characteristic is due to the assertions of those who were traditionally left out of social structures. This still exists, but it is practiced very covertly and in translucent manner, so that the person who is at the receiving end will not be in a position to outrightly claim that she is being discriminated upon. With with newfound knowledge and better economic conditions, the hitherto ST populations, ST's candidate has started defeating the Savarna merit logic, and and have starting setting their own narratives based and not falling to the agenda of the hegemons. The embracing of identity and with a new sense of respect and assertion, the campus has seen the emergence of new ideology based on the philosophy of Ambedkar, Phule, and Periyar, and the rise of new consciousness among the Bahujans. You know, they see through that certain things are designed so that they are kept away from they are kept away from having a full participation in the activities of university space. uh, Another major finding was that most of the candidates, 90% of the respondents out of the 120, said that they were not very comfortable identifying themselves as Hindus. Most of them wrote atheist or humanist when asked to cite their religion. uh, Another interesting thing that came out was that reservation and slash quota student is the new way to deride the achievements of the Bahujan students, and is in fact used as a weapon to belittle the achievements of the SC students. Uh, Proficiency in English language becomes the hallmark to judge SC background students. Lack of SC faculty has made these institutions handicapped in meeting the needs of the students from deprived section. uh, Also, the blatant favoritism that upper caste faculties indulge in, as to who can address them by their first name, who can access their chambers. uh, Someone, professors recommending someone for summer school, winter school in different countries, has also become as to how they view people from ST category students. In most of these universities, SC/ST cell are inoperative and just exist on paper, which does not help in mitigating the problems faced by the SC students. There is a general consensus that SC/ST students are discriminated upon, and the need of the R is to make effective bodies that are you know chaired by that are these bodies are equipped with people who who represent these SC categories. So by there should be a diversity of people coming up and manning these chairs. So moreover, since many of the SC students are first generation learners, they feel that lack of guidance and proper counseling makes their stay in the university campus quite difficult. Most of them, precious some most for most of them, some precious months are wasted just trying to settle in new life as compared to people belonging from other castes. Many a times, SC students are ridiculed for their appearance as well as their lifestyle, and if some of them manage to come into the presumed normality of the upper caste students, they are quickly branded as wannabes. The caste factor is clearly visible in the mess when it's also visible in the mess when upper caste students try to maintain a distance in sharing tables while having food. It is often noticed that though the upper caste students interact with SC students, when it comes to food habit pattern, they avoid mingling with lower caste students and at best avoid them or join, at best avoid them. Moreover, however, there is a consensus that JNU is a much better university as compared to BHU, mainly because that it provides space to all sections of students to raise their issue and is somehow accountable, which is not the case with other universities, and which is known for its high-handedness and the conservative approach toward many things. Lastly, there is a general consensus among the SC students that despite so many institutional obstacles, there is a hope and confidence that these uh, the university space will be utilized to only through hard work and determination to succeed in life. I would like to present some of the data that has emerged from the field. So some of these data amounts to out of the 120 respondents, 101 responded positively on the question that faculties dis- are discriminatory in the Viva process, where out of 60, 52 respondents say that 52 respondents of JNU and 49 respondents of BHU pointed to the same. Out of the 120 respondents, 90 students said that they have faced discrimination, exclusion within the classroom and is practiced by other caste teachers and students. Most of the scheduled caste students feel comfortable to sit and talk with their own members, with their own caste groupings, and also that they find it very uncomfortable to share and as well as spend time with the upper caste students and teachers. There's also been found that teachers from upper caste background ask students about their caste. Students also feel discriminated on the basis of language. Data shows that upper caste uh, of 85% of the 102 respondents said that English medium students are getting higher marks in comparison to the SC category students. Out of the 120 respondents, 115 says that upper caste students feel envy or jealous when they knows about SC students getting fellowship. Uh, However, there is the problem with the SC students getting scholarship. The problem that the upper caste students feel is that even if the SC students, SC category students are getting scholarship, that is that they have qualified through national exam of the JRF conducted by the UGC. So despite that, the upper caste students they will usually assume that these students must be getting the RGNF, which is specifically made for the SC category students. So also that the most of the upper caste students and teachers feel that all these students who are getting scholarship are unworthy, and it's often said that they are sarkari damad, and tumhara to ho jayega. So these are the words that is used to describe the any achievement that in terms of securing scholarship that SC category students get. Most of these universities have no mechanism to deal with the modes of caste discrimination, and all those and I think institutionally appointed things like anti-discrimination officers and SC/ST cells and grievance redressal mechanisms are completely absent in both these universities. So in order to have a better access to how it can be the mitigated, how this exclusion and discrimination can be mitigated. So majority of them said like the Nirbhaya Act, a Rohith Act should be enacted, and which can act as a as a medium through which these institutes of exclusion and uh, you know uh, these ways through which exclusion and discrimination can be mitigated. Uh, so lastly, to say that both these to say that institutions of higher learning have become more sympathetic towards the cause of SC category student would be an understatement, because most of the time these institutions of higher learning are not very welcoming towards these category students, and also the whole attitude towards these category students are through it's a kind of it's a benevolence that they are showing to these category students. The insensitivity shown by professors and the students are the reason as to why many times SC category students are found to be suffering from mental issues, and it becomes very difficult for them to sustain in such scenario. That would be all, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Pankaj. Thank you. It's such a comprehensive presentation, and I know it's a part of a project, so it has a lot to say. But thank you for follow the time limit. and let's talk more in the Q&A. So the final paper we have by Mr. Indrajit Mukherjee. Welcome, Indrajit. Uh, so Indrajit Mukherjee is currently teaching as an assistant professor at the Department of English, Nistarini Women's College, Purulia, and pursuing his doctoral research at the Department of English, Vidyasagar University. Where is Vidyasagar University?
It is in West Bengal. It is in West Midnapur, in West Midnapur district.
Right. Oh, good. Good. One of my friends teaches there. Good. So he has presented papers in various part of Indian institutions. He has many scholarly articles to study and interested in film studies, post-colonial literature, modern literary theory, and avant-garde theater. His latest publication includes Where There Is a Power, There Is Resistance, Negotiating Resistance and Representation in Deenbandhu Mitra's and Indigo Planting Mirror, which is appearing in a book, in an edited book, Rutledge. We are all cyborg now, disrupting gender identity through the cyborg in March Pierce EC&A. So that's another publication we had recently by Cambridge Scholar Publishing. Who remembers those undocumented minors? Locating the genealogy of the oppressed. Uh, that's another publication. So he has a lot of this publication in his. He's also co-editing a critical companion of Toni Morrison's Beloved from the Worldview edition. So the paper today is sharing with us is When Rohith Speaks Through Suicide, Negotiating Subaltern Resistance and Brahmanical Hegemony in Deepa Dhanraj. We have not come here to lie. Very, very intriguing paper, Indrajit. Over to you. So 20 minutes, okay?
Okay.
That's all we have. We are running late time. We need to have time for Q&A. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much, Gaurav sir, for the generous introduction. And thank you to the Department of English, Presidency University, for giving me a space in this international conference on theorizing anti-caste. My paper is going to show how Rohith's untimely death in the form of suicide has become a mode of essential resistance against the dominant hegemonic discourse of the totalitarian regime. Rohith Chakraborty Vemula, an ambitious science fiction writer and a Dalit PhD scholar at the Central University of Hyderabad, represents the caste-based movement in modern autocratic India. His suicidal death highlights the phantasmagoric state of the Indian education system under the present administration, prompting numerous students' organizations and Dalit organizations to call for the establishment of the Rohith Act to safeguard subaltern students from caste-based abuse and prejudice in educational institutions. This incident gives birth to several questions in our critical faculty about the current academic scenario in our country. Number one, who has the right to acquire education in a site where the authority forces a student to commit suicide due to his subaltern identity? Number two, why do subalterns feel being reduced to mere thinkification, or what effect does such an itemization have on them? Number three, how do you construct a model of resistance and sustenance against the prevailing hegemony of the Brahmanical structure? The present paper will demonstrate how the social activist Deepa Dhanraj's documentary We Have Not Come Here to Die, released in 2019, addresses these issues, implying a testament to the momentous occasion that mobilized student activism in India and interrogated caste-based violence in the academic space. After discussing the context of the incident, it will explore how the director provides a significant position to the gendered Dalit voice to Rohith's mother, Radhika Vemula. Applying several philosophical discourses on suicide, it will bring to the fore how Rohith's suicide in this documentary has become an act of agency and resistance against autocratic discourse. In the last few years, India has become a hotbed of student movements against commercialization of education, poor infrastructural conditions, grading systems, and various forms of oppression in academic sites. The suicide of Rohith Vemula at the age of only 27 is an essential illustration of institutional assassination, giving birth to Dhanraj documentary. This documentary represents Rohith's revolutionary spirit to claim a territorially bounded space and shows how thousands of students have spoke out about their experiences of casteist violence in the educational setting to kindle a massive anti-caste campaign in the years after his suicide. This discrimination reflects a more significant historical and social relationship in which Dalits encounter challenges every day when eating, drinking, cleaning, and participating in other social activities with the upper caste people. This critically acclaimed documentary, released precisely 3 years after his suicide, becomes a literary space for the expression of Dalit social and cultural experiences. This film shows how various student organizations have criticized the right-wing political organization ABVP's attack on a special screening of Muzaffarnagar Baki Hai in the University premise of Delhi. Rohith, a member of the Ambedkar Students Association (ASA), was one of the organizers to arrange the film screening on the university campus of Hyderabad as a form of collective resistance. After the local ABVP leader complained about them, the university officials immediately rusticated Rohith and 5 other classmates from the university hostel. They set up the Velivada in the complex shopping site of the university, where they kept photographs and posters of Ambedkar, Periyar, Jyotiba Phule, and Savitribai and other Dalit activists to raise their protest against the authority. The Velivada's construction became a living testimony to a history of tyranny, exploitation, outrage, prejudice, a life that Rohith characterized as the terrible accident in his final letter before his untimely death. Thanks to Rohith's fighting spirit and legacy, the Velivada was transformed overnight into a symbol of democratic protest, a rallying place for all those ready to create their history against the Brahmanical discourse. This ghettoization of subaltern students in the liminal space, laden with caste, creed, gender, and race, became a site of agency and resistance when other members were turned against Rohith by the university authority and the vice chancellor. The documentary begins with the scene in which a gentleman lights the candle in memory of Rohith. The director gradually assembles the sequence of events through eyewitnesses' accounts, testimony from his friend Prasant and other students, Rohith's writings, photographs, and social media posts. The striking and heartbreaking depiction of the film shows how the university administration and Hindu extremists drove him to depression and ultimately thoughts of suicide. His crime was that he no longer wanted to be invisible in his protest against the systematic oppression of the Dalits engineered by the prevailing Brahmanical discourse, illustrating how caste persecution is a constant reality in India. The Brahmanical right-wing organization ABVP sought retribution on the Ambedkar Students Organization and frequently horrified Dalit students when they witnessed their fight against the power structure. It highlights that even the university authority, headed by the Vice Chancellor Aparao Kodile, didn't want the usual course of academics to be disrupted due to the suicidal death of a Dalit student. Even the higher caste students called themselves sufferers and thought it absolutely absurd that the rest had to endure the disturbance created by the suicide of one subaltern student with whom they felt they had no connection. One of their words, "He was not my brother," highlights the firmly established "we against them" ideology that renders one indifferent to others' sufferings, even in an academic space, and demonstrates how upper classes do not give importance to subaltern oppression. As Mena Kandaswamy shows how Rohith's untimely death due to his caste-based identity lays bare the true state of our educational system. A vice-chancellor with a decade-old history of rusticating Dalit students, the involving of central ministers to settle scores on behalf of right-wing Hindu forces. This film represents Radhika Vemula, Rohith's mother, as an influential Dalit female figure, a woman of resistance and sustenance, rather than a helpless victim of her poor circumstances. When Deepa depicts her eyes locked on the portrait of her beloved son on the stage, we find that the picture shifts from a blustering political indictment to a poignant personal tale. Radhika travels in this film around every nook and corner of the country to speak to youthful people after being arrested and asks our Prime Minister, "Is my son an anti-national or a son of Mother India?" Although she has not received justice after days of the assault, she states emphatically in the last scene, "I see Rohith among all of you," indicating how the director provides direct prominence to the gendered subaltern voice through Radhika Vemula. This film portrays Dalit people mistreatment and institutional persecution via Rohit's suicide note and brings together minority groups and student organizations to combat Hindu nationalism. Despite their dire socio-economic circumstances, countless members of the lowest social strata have only managed to get admission to our country's premier educational institutions after overcoming several challenges. Under the Brahmanical regime, their aspirations and ambitions get continually crushed, dooming women like Radhika to oblivion in every part of our country. Even though they have given up all hope, they continue to bite the ground to ensure that not a single Rohit gets lost in their wire with Brahmanical discourse and that no mother suffers, guiding us in the direction of a new dawn. The documentary ends with an uncomfortable question, that is, Rohit is not the first student to face caste abuse in an academic setting, but can we promise that he will be the last one on this Republic Day? Margin is a product of a consequences of binaristic structure of various kinds of dominating discourses, as noted by Bill Ashcroft, preventing the development of capabilities. The idea of marginality commonly refers to the socio-cultural and economic realms in which disadvantaged individuals struggle to achieve equitable access to resources and social engagement. However, this documentary uses several postings from Rohit's previous Facebook account, photographs, and essays to highlight the depth of his knowledge beyond his age, rather than as a nostalgic trope. It brings to the fore how the marginalized have mobilized or used online platforms like Facebook, Instagram, Orkut, Twitter exceptionally well when media and academic sites have closed their doors. When the fourth pillar of democracy looks to have succumbed to fascist administrators' requirements, it becomes a right for students to raise their voice against the oppression of Dalits through virtual space. However, Dickens Leonard asks an essential question in this context. He asks, did Rohit's death embody the lack or failure of an anti-caste community located and positioned from an outcast ontology, especially in modern spaces in our country? Although the famous French sociologist Émile Durkheim defines suicide as the result of the direct or an indirect pressure exerted on us, I will show how Rohit's suicide becomes a final act of resistance, an act of bravery, one of the new strategies of rebelling by preventing his corpses from being utilized for the profit of Brahmanical apparatuses. Although Littman demonstrates that people commit suicide because they cannot accept their pain, Daniel Walker shows how individuals even committed suicide in hopes of making a spiritual return to their former homelands. Suicide is an act that affects all of our life and forces us to confront the inexplicable and or unsayable. From the 20th century to the present days, arguments about the meaning of suicide have served as a fertile ground for researchers to make out why individuals commit suicide and how to avoid it. The potential of suicide as a revolt and resistance of the body to the primacy of life in modern time gets examined in a Foucauldian framework to illustrate modern forms of power processes. This kind of resistance occurs when voluntary death opposes the most original building of biopower precedence of life over death at the point when the contemporary individual subject decides not to choose life, since resistance comes to the fore where there is the power, as said by Foucault. Rohit's suicide confounds the social, political, economic, historical, cultural, and psychological devastation inflicted on the human psyche and usually non-human experience by bringing them together in a single space. His suicide testified to the individual and private right to die at the borders and in the intersites of power that was exercised over life, critiquing the sovereign of setting up who matters and who doesn't, who is disposable and who is not, as said by Judith Butler. It emphasizes a world of reciprocal recognition in Rohith's search for anything beyond human existence, exhibiting the gift of suicide in an extensive postscript on attitudes about death by stressing ontology and the existential state of being non-human. His suicide demonstrates the individual's right to death and authority over life, implying freedom in the Foucauldian sense to choose to murder one's body, to terminate his life as a response to the mentality that makes his death the biggest meaninglessness inside this meaningless universe constructed by Brahmanical or totalitarian regime. Because his suicide is not only an escape from bare life, it signifies a refusal of the very first order of contemporary normalizing society, a more radical type of resistance than any other form of protest. As Hedge's article, The Gift of a Life and Death, claims that Rohit's death becomes a self-contained gift, questioning an inherent sociality as well as revolutionary radicalism of action. It is not a case of choosing death over being abnormal. Instead, it is a case of choosing death being over being abnormal as a form of defiance against the status quo. While all other examples of resistance mechanisms in contemporary society are bound to lose their abnormality at some point and transform into a new category of normality as social standards challenge, suicide can avoid this tragic conclusion from homosexual like Rohith, as Agamben shows us how these figures represent such a disquieting element in the order of the modern nation-state and put the originary fiction of modern sovereignty in crisis. In this article, the focal point of interest has been twofold. First, this paper looks at the university setting as a liminal space that can obliterate the subaltern by the emergence of a blurring of identity that negates any sense of class, caste, gender, religion. And secondly, it illustrates how this liminal space metamorphoses into a subaltern site in which students embody their mode of resistance and agency, spreading their movements across the country. That is what Dhanraj's appalling documentary, We Have Not Come Here to Die, brings to the forefront, a possibility of a dynamic space against the national status quo of contested spaces. To be concluded, it can be said that suicide becomes a right when the body is being exploited by the ideological state apparatuses of what Giorgio Agamben said absolute sovereignty. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Indrajit. Thank you. And you finished on time. That's wonderful. Let me just quickly. So, though I have, I wish we had a lot of time to discuss each and every paper. So I made some comments. So what I'll do, I'll actually send many of these through email, so we can actually also feel free to also have a Zoom call personally with me. We can discuss more. So, but let me quickly, like, overall, what. So first of all, thank you for all these brilliantly thought out, well written papers. All of these four papers. Sorry, all of these four papers dealing with caste on campus and or campus casteism or casteized campus kind of space that you are providing several critique to the ongoing discrimination on campus. Now, studying campus life and campus politics has been part of various social science research or studies, but your papers are capturing the kind of changes that are happening or occurring in the name of caste identity in very recent time, which is especially last 10 years, right? Even less than that. So that way, it makes like your study very, very contemporary and very relevant to the ongoing discourse. Now, everyone attempted to understand in all these papers to understand the discrimination from various angles. Two papers, which is of Himanshu and Indrajit, are from the you come from English literature background, and that also you make their argument from a literature point of view, and that is kind of very visible in the paper. I can see the way you citing or not citing, just explaining the text. So So that shows that you and me are different in terms of literature. I travel in both. I have a literary background, and then I moved to sociology. So I understand that where you come from. Okay. Now, Soudh Ismail is from political science background, and Pankaj is from law and governance, and that also I can see that it reflects in the disciplinary strength in that paper. Now, starting with Dr. Pankaj Kumar's paper, you have taken the social exclusion framework to understand the discrimination in BHU and GNU, access or denial of resources such as education or campus life, and naming of hostels, existing prejudices about lower caste, classroom dynamics. All these have very adverse impact on the learnings of Dalit students. And then the ideological discrimination. I would rather use the word exclusion or alienation to replace the word discrimination here, because there is no ideological discrimination as such. It is more of a kind of alienation, ideological alienation, where Dalits are excluded from the debate, and that actually also changed. Now, for example, if you look at the the most prominent left discourse in campuses, that has changed from Mandal 2 onwards, from 2006 onwards. Now it's more Dalit centric and OBC centric equally. So I understand the paper is part of the larger project, but for this particular paper, I think you should focus on the caste issue and not on every aspect of campus life. So, Pankaj, right now, what your paper is telling us is kind of giving various angles of campus life, including, so, even gender and all that. So I think you can eliminate that and just focus on the caste angle. Just focus on one to kind of bring the clear argument. I like your finding. One of very finding interesting is that you said 90% of the respondents are not comfortable in identifying themselves as Hindu as part of Hinduism. Then how are they identifying themselves? Is there a common identity among Dalits that is being created on campus? So that can also be one of our questions to look out. How are they representing themselves, identifying themselves? Now, the idea that knowledge in the university space, knowledge is a site of struggle, and that the politics of knowledge is often deeply intertwined with the power unbalances. And so now, movement that we see around, they are not only, I'm talking about the Dalit movements in identity, they are not only interventing in developing counter knowledge of different types, but also challenging what is presented, and in more philosophical term, like kind of challenging the scientific truth, but also building counter expertise. Now, this challenging of, like, if you talk in Gramscian sense, the common sense has been very crucial when you look at the idea of opposing Hindu gods or promoting beef culture. But we also need to look at it critically. I wrote a paper in 2016 about this beef politics. So, Soudh, you were mentioning. So there are two. So there's my paper and Dr. Sambaiya Gundi Mera's paper, which is on HCU. Mine was in general on covering Osmania, but these two papers, I think you can have a look. And because the way we made our argument, we both made two different arguments. And then there was a third argument by another scholar. So bring those arguments. And Dalit student as a whole are thinking about this. How are they thinking about this resistance? Are they conscious in terms of challenging this common sense, or are they doing it only because the other group is telling them to do? And there is a serious debate on, especially on the beef issue, which is controversial, of course. But bring these arguments. See how these scholars are placing their argument. Because to me, by opposing this thing, basically what I suggested is, I said we are basically fighting their fight, fighting their battle, because this whole idea of purity, impurity is given by them, and we are believing in that, and then we are actually countering that by doing this. So in a way, we are basically fighting from their side. It is not leading us. So think of, if Ambedkar was alive, how would he respond to this? Because Ambedkar would not take this easy path to counter. He would to take the academic way, providing more counter logic. Because the thing is, the society, our, if you see a society in general, and even student, Dalit student, a Muslim student population, or even OBC student, they are not ready for these revolt, because there is no socialization that we do. So, and then I think of like very interesting data that even in Pankaj's paper, like all these 90% of respondents says this, and these are very relevant questions. Now, if you go and survey how many Dalit girls would like to eat beef, or eat meat even. Now, being vegetarian or non-vegetarian is also part of choice, irrespective of your caste class, right? So, are we bringing that argument in our discourse? So, some of this, I'm saying, as a scholar, we should be critical of these issues rather than just taking it as that is not just looking from the movement point of view. Because activist language is always different than the common student language. They would say all Bahujan used to eat meat. All. So, but there is nothing all. I mean, there was no category of Bahujan as such. There was no Mool Nivasi as such. So these categories we need to deconstruct. What does it mean when we say ourselves Mool Nivasi or Bahujan? This is, I say, it's part of the ideological ambiguities. That is why we keep creating this new terminology which has no solid basis. Right? Where do they come from, and what do they actually really know about Mool Nivasi? And then it also goes against, like, I like your term movement repertoire, how actually identity-based movement, caste-based movement are generating this repertoire. Because it is also linked with, there is a paper, if you want to look at, by Della de Porta, who's a great movement scholar. She wrote called knowledge repertoire. One is that, and there is another one is contentions politics. Both of them are very useful to understand this thing. Okay, now moving ahead. So I think in maybe it was Pankaj's paper where he also was bringing Louis Althusser. I think that does not fit in the debate. So my suggestion is to avoid Althusser. Just focus on. Was it your or Ishmail? You were bringing Louis Althusser? No, I think maybe it's Pankaj. So just focus on, if you are using cultural capital.
It was in my paper.
Okay, Pankaj, no?
Yes, sir.
Oh, Indrajit, huh?
No, Pankaj.
Oh, sorry, Pankaj. Okay, sorry. So
Yes.
actually, because I'm looking at screen, it's so small, I can't see all the faces. But yeah, but thank you. So the thing is, Louis Althusser does not fit in the debate. So when you write for a journal or for publication, just focus on one particular theme given by like for example, Bourdieu. So just explain that and then delete all other, keep it for other things. So cultural reproduction, which is very, very appropriate to convey your argument, and stick to that. So as a part of your paper deals with the more micro processes of Dalit life on campus space, their struggle of dealing with the remarks on their SCST fellowship, you said stereotypes about Dalit as non-meritorious, etc. So fellowship, now if you look at it, on the one hand is a mechanism of social empowerment, but on the other hand, it's also a label that Dalit students carries as he or she is never seen as capable of availing any fellowship, and thus they are mocked, humiliated, commented upon by their peers. So similarly, reservation receive the same treatment. So reserve category is another taboo that one has to live. But now the task is, our duty is to problematize the OBC as a category, because they are also now availing that same. Are they? Is it just the reservation, or is it? Are we dealing with the more nuanced discrimination of caste here? Because does it apply to the OBC as a reserved category? Are they called quotawalas? So I think if we compare them, then we'll have kind of more interesting debate. So your paper also explores the classroom as a space which is often dominated by those who are speaking the mainstream language and culture. Now think of SCST cell. Now you use that term, and which is we have all over campus SCST cell. they occupying same space in the democratic processes in campus life. But are Dalit students able to go beyond these cells and become an independent entity in any of the campuses? So, because I think we keep remaining in our cells, or like cell never becomes a full on its own. So, try to deal conceptually with this term cell, and that's where you can use this literature to understand that how even these terms are created. Other spaces of campus life, such as different kind of celebration to counter the mainstream, as a result, it helps build up the coalition that become fight. So what happened in from 2006-7 onwards, since the OBC reservation came, now, and this never happened in campus life, that we are now doing a coalition politics where Muslims, Dalits, OBC, ST are also now coming together because now, for example, even going back to the beef debate, um, I can share the paper recently I written, which carry those arguments as well, that it was started by ST students, but then we don't talk about them, we don't even interview them. It was actually their demand in JNU. They said we come from a beef and pork eating society, but when we come to Delhi, we have to survive on dal roti, which is not our food. The argument came from there, and they made a organization called Naga Society for Democratic Food Right or something. So that I can actually quickly share that paper with you now. So now, if you I think you can also conceptualize the idea of space, the caste space on campus. Are Dalit students able to demand a safe space on campus for themselves? Take a critical look at the formation of Velivada formation. Now, Velivada is a very interesting, I think two of the paper have used this concept. Why do they have to be reactionary? Is there a way one can be part of a longer battle for social justice rather than kind of issue-based activism and not isolating themselves in this? There is a scholars say that there is a production of meaning and identity, my space, my neighborhood, my community, my people, my Velivara. But it's a defensive identity, identity of retrenchment. Manuel Castle says, to be known against the unpredictability, this defenseless against a kind of global whirlwind. People, stuck to themselves, whatever they had, whoever they are, become their identity. That's where Bahujan, Moolnivasi. But how do we do justice in a longer run? Are Dalit students able to address the real issue? Are they able to create a collective memory? So that is another question. So I think papers, what was lacking in the papers, I noticed, because we're all talking about a identity formation here on campuses. What was missing, I think, is the larger literature on identity. It's called new social movement, that the framework I also used in. So now we can't look at these formation from the old classical social movement framework. The new framework, which is actually given by Habermas, Manuel Castle, Albert Malusi. So these four thinkers, actually, those who are talking about new social movement, then I think you will understand clearly what does it mean to how should we understand this. Okay, now out of these four papers, three lacks the, except I think Pankaj, because it comes from a project, so it has clear-cut methodology, but other papers are lacking the description of methodology. Many didn't even mention. So I think we should spend at least half a page or one page describing the methodology. How do they collect data, choose samples? Similarly, literature review is also missing. So that could have been strength. So the another issue that I found, and then I am opening it for questions you have any. My issue I find here that when we're looking at here Rohith's death, which is an act of resistance, as we are looking at merely as a suicide and trying to limit our debate to suicide and explaining it by using Durkheim's, I think Durkheimian category does not do justice with caste-related identity issues. That is very complex. We try to do that because we were studying the suicides on campuses, and I can provide you some data. There are thousands of suicides are happening, almost close to kind of, I think, 1 lakh suicide happened in last 10 years within school and higher education. So, but Durkheimian category does not fit here because caste is a completely different one. So my suggestion is to read to the social identity theory by Tajfel and Turner, and provide a lens through which to explore the relational context, connection, and power dynamics that exist between campus, administration, conformist or non-conformist. And it will open up the space for those voices who think Rohit's suicide was a political act, and those who diminish his act as and minimize it to identity politics. So these are the questions that we have to deal. Not real, not merely just studying it as a suicide and calling it and bringing those is good for literature, but making an argument is, I think suicide is a way out of one way out of the situation. But what about those who have been carrying the trauma within them in everyday life on campus, struggling with their identity while having a social interaction or classroom interaction? In other words, what I'm saying is that mental health is an issue that should be talked about, addressed in a more community fashion. As Himanshu's paper which was focusing on Yashica, that's coming out as the latest discourse. Does our community provide those spaces and skill to an individual to express himself or herself? So make the community a responsible agency, because finally the loss of an individual is the loss of entire community. And because we are talking, there must be, as we are talking now, there are thousands of people who are going through this trauma. So it's not a simple issue of suicide, it's much deeper than that. So in this process, I think there are many suggestions I have, but I think I'll go. One, Ismail's paper rightly pointed out that the nature and dynamics of caste-based discrimination and mobilization are multifarious in terms of the issues it has taken, the strategies protests participate and have adopted, the agendas and goals that they set for mobilization. What makes the protest more contentious? In this context, we need to problematize the idea of Valley Veda. Do these strategies fit in the movement repertoire? So that is another question. So with that, let me quickly share, and please feel free to ask your question, and then we have few minutes to do that. Yes, please. Yes, any questions? We have about 5-7 minutes to finish. Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Hi, Gaurav. This is Mohitosh.
Hi, Mohitosh.
So yeah. So I'm using another laptop because I'm already logged in with others. So I just wanted to thank you personally because I haven't been able to meet you otherwise. So thank you for actually making it to the conference in spite of your busy schedule, and so nicely and efficiently, insightfully conducting the session. I was there listening to the entire session. So thank you for your absolutely valuable feedback and insights. I just wanted to say hi and thank you.
Sure. No, thank you. Nice to see you. And no, these are really brilliant. So do you have some 2-3 minutes? Yes, Sagar. Okay.
So I think there are some questions in the chat box, sir.
Oh, okay, good. So my question: can education help in completely wiping out the question of caste discrimination? If yes, then why do you think still fails? Okay, that's a very though doesn't have an easy answer, but yeah, Pankaj, if you want to quickly answer in a minute.
Yes, I see the question. Yes, as said by Professor Pathania, there is no easy answer to saying that, because I from my opinion, I think that education alone cannot help in eradicating caste, as we see that some of the most educated, sophisticated, and privileged people practice caste. And university is not a it's not a blue pill that will solve every problem. So, however, speaking from the vantage point of the marginalized, I can say that education will act as a tool towards becoming more. It will help them become more aware, conscious, and in a better position to tackle the discrimination and exclusion. So that way they can actually pose a challenge to the forms of discrimination and exclusion perpetrated by the upper caste, or any individual for that matter. So I think apart from education, what we need more than ever is a social revolution that will actually challenge the narratives, uh, and it can take many forms. And we need to build on what we have already achieved.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you, Pankaj. And there is another
Benefit that
one
has.
by Sagar Das, which is basically, if anyone wants to answer, how do you address the connection between the pedagogical framework of the institution and the movement? Is there any connection, or is it mostly related to already existing long tradition of protest within these campus spaces? Ismail, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think I would like to answer that question, and there is a direct connection between the pedagogical framework of the university and the larger anti-caste movements, and but it's not necessarily limited to the pedagogy, but the larger political, socio-political context and change which happened in India since 1990s. And the first factor, the primary factor which affected the change in the university is the Mandal Commission. Of course, the Mandal Commission reforms and the subsequent changes which happened in the cultural and structural spheres of universities. And a lot of faculties from Dalit Baujan, not a lot of faculties, but comparatively, some faculties have joined in universities after 1990s due to the reservation, Mandal reservation, and then they also brought in the discourses of caste and the politics of representation and various theoretical frameworks in the pedagogical framework, and it eventually led to a larger movement against caste in campus spaces. And also in the case of HCU, it was not just the Mandal Commission reforms, but the influence of Sunduru massacre, the Karamchedu massacre, and the political power of BSP in Uttar Pradesh has also influenced the new generation, the first generation Dalit scholars to take up the issue of caste and to mobilize for the rights of marginalization. So it has, my answer to that question would be, it has a very influential connection. There is an influential connection between the pedagogical framework of the university and the anti-caste movements, but it's not limited to the pedagogy, but to the larger socio-political changes which happened in the country since 1990s.
Good. Any final conclusion? So, my line sending that but just email me. Okay. So, good. So I think we're all set then. We are within the time limit. And any final comment from your Himanshu or Indrajit?
It has been a fascinating experience to be shared by you. And I have recently read your book, The University as a Site of Resistance, Identity and Student Politics. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. Himanshu?
So you asked me that you said that my language is somewhat similar to that of Dr. Kanchalaya. You may find it similar because I have borrowed the term Dalit Baujan from his text Why I'm Not a Hindu, but I did not cite him because there is no direct reference to his text in my work, and I was thinking to add him later on when I'll add a bibliography in my paper, as it is now work in progress, and I hope to make it better by including all your feedbacks and suggestions.
Oh yeah, and also talk to him sometime, or you are there, meet him, and read his writings. So much written, especially when you start with talking about Hindu God and Lakshmi and all. He has been talking about it for past 20 years, and we've been hearing. So he brought up these arguments. So it's better to quote him in that sense. And I think you also, your paper is also a lot of aspect you've covered of basically looks more of a review of Yashica Dutt's book. So you should also publish it as a review somewhere. You have read the book thoroughly. So good. So I can. So please write to me. I'll send more writings on this, and let's make it more conceptual paper. Yeah. So good to see you all, and should get back to Sagar Das, who's the organizer. So thank you, and I'm really glad. I am still reading your papers. All these papers I have taken printouts, so made some comments. But I've also typed. So let's send through email personally. Okay, good.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much, sir.
Okay, thank you so much.